My name is Ava Sinclair, and the first thing my mother ever taught me about business was how to lose gracefully. She just never imagined I'd apply that lesson to her. The conference room smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee, my mother's natural habitat. She stood at the head of the table, voice sharp as a bell, her reflection glinting off the glass wall behind her. I sat 3 seats down, silent, taking notes that didn't matter. The meeting was hers. The spotlight was hers, and every word she spoke was designed to remind everyone that VIXA Consulting existed because of her brilliance alone. When someone mentioned one of our early investors, she smiled thinly. "We had a few small backers," she said, waving her hand as if brushing off dust. "But strategy, not money, builds an empire." Then she turned to me. "Ava here could learn that someday if she ever understands how business actually works." The laughter that followed was polite, even nervous. My pen didn't stop moving. I'd heard those words before, too soft, too naive, too emotional. But what she didn't know was that the small backer she'd just dismissed had quietly written every check that kept her empire alive. That small backer was me. I watched her finish her presentation, her voice echoing against the walls I'd paid for. When the meeting ended, she kissed my cheek like a queen, blessing her subject. "Someday, darling, you'll find your path," she said. I smiled back. "Oh, I already have." She didn't know it then, but the empire she built on arrogance was standing on my patience. And patience, unlike pride, collects interest. When I was little, my mother used to tell people I was born during a board meeting. She came out right on schedule, she'd say with a laugh, a punctual child with no sense of profit margin. She said it often enough that I started to believe the second half was true. Growing up in the Sinclair household meant living inside a case study on ambition. My mother, Victoria Sinclair, was the kind of woman people wrote magazine profiles about: sharp suits, sharper instincts. She built VIXA Consulting from her living room after divorcing my father, turning it into one of the fastest-growing boutique firms on the West Coast. Clients worshipped her. Employees feared her. And I tried to understand her. When I was 14, I came home with a school project about ethical business practices. She glanced at my poster and said, "That's cute, honey. But you'll learn soon that ethics don't pay dividends." By the time I was 22, I'd graduated from Stanford and had the kind of resume that made recruiters salivate. I could have joined her company, but the idea of working under her thumb made my skin crawl. Instead, I went to work for a venture capital firm, a decision she called a predictable mistake. "Venture capital is just gambling with spreadsheets," she said once over dinner, slicing her steak with surgical precision. "You're chasing luck, not building legacy." I remember setting down my fork and smiling. Maybe. But some of us are better at reading odds. She didn't laugh. 2 years later, I launched my own fund, Vanguard Atelier, a name she would have hated for being too abstract. We specialized in early-stage consulting startups. Ironically, VIXA fit the criteria perfectly. I remember the night I saw her company's name come across our internal investment board. Small-scale consulting firm in need of seed extension, it read. Founder Victoria Sinclair. I stared at it for a long time. Then I checked the numbers. The margins were thin. The burn rate aggressive. Without capital, she'd fold within months. It wasn't sentiment that made me approve the investment. It was curiosity. I wanted to see what she'd build when she didn't know she owed someone else the ground beneath her feet. I used a shell firm, Atria Holdings, to conceal the source of funding. No one at VIXA ever learned who the investor was. The moment the transfer went through, her company stabilized. By the next quarter, profits doubled. The press hailed her comeback as a masterclass in leadership. She never knew that leadership had a price tag, and I'd been the one to pay it. Sometimes I'd attend her public talks just to watch her command a room. She had that magnetic arrogance people mistake for confidence. She'd say things like, "Business is war in tailored clothing," and the audience would erupt in applause. I'd stand in the back unseen, thinking war is only glorious to the one holding the funding. There was something poetic about it. The daughter she thought lacked business sense had quietly become the invisible architect of her success. Every empire needs a silent investor, and every silent investor eventually learns when to stop funding the fantasy. 3 years after that investment, my mother's face was everywhere. Business magazines called her the Iron Visionary. Panels introduced her as a symbol of female excellence in leadership, and she basked in every spotlight like it was sunlight made just for her. I watched it all from the audience, champagne glass in hand, invisible and uncredited. I had learned to exist in the margins of her glory, quiet, efficient, and perfectly aware that every headline praising her strategic brilliance was built on my capital. It was a strange form of pride, and an even stranger form of punishment. At the Forbes Women in Power Summit, she gave a speech that would later go viral. Dressed in emerald green and confidence, she said, "Women don't wait for doors to open. They build the building." The crowd cheered. I smiled faintly, because I had quite literally built hers. When she stepped down from the stage, I went to congratulate her. "That was an incredible speech," I said. She took my hand, squeezing it with practiced warmth. "Thank you, darling. You see what I mean now, right? Success takes vision, not sentiment." There it was again, the little knife wrapped in affection. I wanted to tell her that the vision she was so proud of came from data projections I'd personally modeled, that the strategy she bragged about existed because my fund had covered her early losses. But I didn't. Revenge-like capital grows best when left to mature. Over dinner that night, surrounded by her friends and investors, she raised her glass. "To my daughter," she said, smiling. "May she one day learn that emotions don't build empires." The table laughed. I laughed too. Because they were right, emotions don't build empires, but they can dismantle them. Back in my office the next morning, I called Daniel Cho, my partner at Vanguard. "She's planning to expand into Asia," I told him. "Double down on exposure, triple the risk." Daniel exhaled. "If the numbers don't hold, she's going to implode." "I know," I said. "Which is why I'm going to make sure the numbers stop holding." He hesitated. "You're really doing this?" "She's been teaching me strategy my whole life. It's time to show her I was paying attention." That week, I began rerouting funds. Slowly and visibly. It was easy. VIXA relied entirely on our capital flow. I reduced renewals, delayed transfers, redirected liquidity into other projects. Each action small, almost unnoticeable, but collectively lethal. I didn't need to destroy her publicly. I wanted the downfall to come from the same arrogance that had built her name, and it worked. Within 2 months, the first cracks appeared. Her CFO emailed my office, unaware I was on the receiving end of his panic. "Need immediate capital injection, forecast gap widening." 2 days later, founder requesting urgent meeting with investor representative. I declined both. At her next gala, I watched her smile tighter than usual, her voice just a fraction more brittle. She didn't know the ground beneath her was shifting. Someone once told me revenge is best served cold. I preferred mine served quarterly with the same precision as a financial report. The next step wasn't anger, it was logistics, and I'd already set the clock ticking. It began with a phone call. "Eleanor," I said, calm but deliberate. "How quickly can we liquidate every VIXA asset without triggering compliance?" She paused. "If you want to stay invisible, 72 hours. Maybe less." "Do it," I said. "Once we start, there's no reversing this. Are you sure you want to go nuclear?" I looked out at the city's fractured reflections. She wanted me to learn business. This is the lesson. 72 hours. Across town, my mother prepared her Asia expansion launch at the Ritz. The invite in my inbox read, "Your mother's proudest moment. I RSVP'd, yes, 48 hours. Daniel called. "Ava pulling out everything will ruin her. That's the idea. She's your mother." "Not anymore." He sighed. "You sound just like her. Maybe I did revenge reshapes us in familiar ways." 24 hours. Eleanor confirmed, every withdrawal queued, every signature ready. "Once markets open, the press will follow," she warned. That night I couldn't sleep. Her old phrase echoed emotions don't build empires. Maybe they only burn them down. 12 hours. I passed VIXA's glowing tower. Through the glass my mother laughed with a journalist flawless, invincible. She wasn't. 3 hours. Eleanor texted one word. Executing. Transfers triggered balances, collapsed, deals froze. Hours. By noon, VIXA's accounts were empty. Reporters circled before she even understood the breach. That evening, I entered the Ritz ballroom. She stood poised under chandeliers until her assistant whispered disaster into her ear. The color drained from her face. Our eyes met confusion, fear, disbelief. I raised my glass. 72 hours her empire collapsing, not in flames but in silence. She'd wanted to teach me strategy. I'd simply finished the lesson. The morning after the gala, headlines hit hard. Sinclair Empire, under investigation for insolvency. CEO Victoria Sinclair faces liquidity meltdown. The vultures were fast, but I already knew every number that broke her empire. It wasn't an accident. It was architecture. By noon, Daniel stormed into my office. "It's bad. Investors gone, accounts frozen, SEC circling." "Then everything's working," I said. He stared. "You're enjoying this?" "No, I'm recording it. Across town my mother fought a losing war. 6 missed calls. The 7th came from an unknown number. Ava, it's me. Someone sabotaged VIXA. You worked in finance, can you check?" I hesitated. "I already have." "What do you mean?" I breathed out. "You once said emotions don't build empires. You were right, they destroy them." That night, her downfall went viral. Reporters camped outside her mansion, Partners issued statements of shock. Some called her fall tragic. Others blamed a silent investor. No one knew the silent investor was her daughter. 2 days later, I visited her. The woman who opened the door was hollow hair, undone, voice bitter. You came to gloat. No, to end it. You destroyed me, Ava. For what pride? For peace, I said. You built an empire on humiliation. You wanted me to remember I'd never be you. You were right, I became something else. You think this makes you stronger? No, just free. As I left, she whispered, "You'll regret this." Maybe, but they'll be my regrets, not your legacy. Outside, the city glowed gold in the rising sun. Power taken in silence was satisfying, but peace earned through consequence was priceless. It took less than a week for the dust to settle. VIXA was gone. Its assets liquidated its staff, scattered its name quietly erased from industry databases. For years, my mother's brand had been her crown. Now it was a ghost that people whispered about at conferences before changing the subject. I didn't attend the bankruptcy hearings. I didn't need to. I'd already witnessed her empire collapse in the only place that mattered her pride. But revenge has an echo, and mine lingered longer than I expected. One evening, I found myself driving past the old VIXA building. The lights were off, except for one flickering in the top floor, the old boardroom where she once dismissed me with a smile. The memory rose sharp and vivid, her voice saying, "You lack business sense." I parked the car and sat there staring at the empty windows. For years I had thought justice meant watching her lose everything. And I got what I wanted. But I hadn't anticipated what came after. Silence. No cheers, no closure, just an expensive quiet. A week later, Daniel stopped by my office. "You haven't been the same," he said gently. "You won. Why does it feel like you lost?" I smiled faintly. "Because winning doesn't feel like what I imagined." He nodded. "What now?" "Now," I said, closing my laptop, "I build something that doesn't need to hurt anyone to exist." The next few months, I redirected Vanguard's focus toward mentorship funding female-led startups, offering resources instead of control. I wanted to invest in women who reminded me of who I could have been if someone had believed in me instead of competing with me. Ironically, her fall became my foundation. 6 months later, I received a letter, not from a lawyer, but from her. It wasn't long, just one page written in her sharp, familiar handwriting. "Ava, I spent my life building things I could show the world. You built something I didn't see coming, discipline. You were right, I taught you strategy, but I never taught you grace. You learned that on your own. Maybe it's time I learned something from you." Mom? I didn't cry. I didn't forgive. But I understood. People think revenge is an ending. It's not. It's a transition, the point where pain changes shape, not where it disappears. That weekend, I walked into a conference room, not unlike the ones she used to own. But this time, I stood at the head of the table. No legacy to outshine, no voice to silence me. Just my own. "My name is Ava Sinclair." I began, my voice steady. "And this fund doesn't invest in revenge. It invests in renewal." The room fell silent. Somewhere in that silence, I knew I'd finally become what she never did. A woman who didn't need to destroy to prove she could build. And that, I realized, was the truest revenge of all. People often think revenge ends when your enemy falls. But what they never tell you is that silence afterward can feel heavier than the victory itself. When I first decided to take everything from my mother, I told myself it was about justice, about finally proving that the daughter she dismissed was the one who kept her empire alive. And in a way, I succeeded. Her arrogance collapsed. Her empire vanished. Her name became a footnote. But in the quiet that followed, I realized something far more profound. I had spent years building my identity around her shadow, around the pain she caused, the validation she denied. The moment she disappeared, I had to face the question she never could. Who am I without the war? The answer wasn't power. It wasn't money. It was peace. Revenge had given me a voice. But forgiveness, even the kind that doesn't involve reconciliation, gave me freedom. I stopped chasing the reflection of her success and started creating something that was mine alone. The world would remember Victoria Sinclair as the woman who rose and fell spectacularly. But I would remember her differently as the greatest lesson I ever learned about strength. Because strength isn't proving someone wrong, it's refusing to become them. And that, after all the numbers, the silence, and the reckoning, was the real return on investment.